Good morning, Bethel students, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak with you as part of your Convocation series. I'm Dr. Kendra Knight, and I'm a faculty member in the College of Communication at DePaul University in Chicago. Before earning my master's and doctorate at Arizona State University, I graduated with my Bachelor of Arts in Speech Communication from Baker University, which is just a couple of hours up I-35 from where you all are in Newton. So as a Kansas native, I'm especially honored to have the opportunity to visit with you today and in the coming days. I want to remind you, of course, that this lecture is taking place remotely from the comfort of my home office, and so there may be occasionally tech glitches or various things with the PowerPoint. I hope that doesn't take place, but if so, I hope we'll bear with each other. The title of my presentation today is Passion, Pragmatism, and Payoffs, Emerging Adults' Work Relationship Boundaries. Work-life boundary strategies are defined as cognitive, physical, temporal, and behavioral approaches to managing the interrelationship of work-life. So you'll sometimes see work/life or work-life. This is the general category or classification of scholarship that deals with how people manage the increasingly fluid boundaries between their occupation, their paid work, their activities in the paid labor sphere, and other elements of their life. Sometimes you'll see this limited to work family, including childcare, caring for aging parents, things like that. But I like the broader term of work life because it also includes community involvement, leisure activities, things like that. And so we can think of work-life boundary strategies as all the ways that people try to manage those boundaries, whether it's through conflict or enhancement or the various dilemmas they encounter. And kind of the main thesis of my whole research program is that folks who are emerging adults like yourselves encounter these things. But let's talk a little bit more specifically about boundary strategies before we get to that. So we can think of boundary strategies on a continuum. If you think of it like that, the outer poles contain, on one hand, segmentation. So these are our efforts to physically or psychologically separate work and life, so to keep them distinct from each other. At the other end of a continuum, you could think of integration. These are strategies where people are intentionally integrating, intermingling, or mixing aspects of their lives. And then if those are the outer poles on the continuum, we would have points contained within the continuum, such as boundary strategies like accommodation, whereby you might reduce your involvement in one realm, such as family life, to enable fuller participation in another realm, like paid work. Or we might see strategies like compensation, where let's say you're not very satisfied in one domain, and so you compensate you counterbalance that dissatisfaction by increasing your involvement in another domain. Here is a visual depiction of what I was saying there, with segmentation on the far left end of the spectrum, integration on the far right. Various boundary strategies can be located in between. So as I mentioned, I'm talking to you today about work-life experiences in emerging adulthood. So I think it's wise to just briefly talk about emerging adulthood so we're on the same page about that. Emerging adulthood is a socioculturally dependent age of lifespan development, typically associated with the ages 18 to 29 years, but really with a core focus of those ages between 18 to 25. We can often think of emerging adulthood as a developmental stage that's in between adolescence and adulthood. So lots of times emerging adults will say that they feel like a grown-up in some ways and still an adolescent or not quite a grown-up in others. And importantly, this is a life stage where identities are in flux, our relational identities with romantic partners, families, friends, as well as our occupational and educational identities. And because there's so much fluidity, this is a time period that's associated with a lot of experimentation and exploration. Sometimes scholars will use the term instability to refer to that. And what they mean is a lot of stopping and starting. So in relationships, that might look like having partners for short periods of time, and you break up and you discover that's not kind of the right kind of partner I want or the person I want to be in a relationship. You probably also experience instability in the sense of maybe changing majors or changing in educational pursuits. Those are both examples of experimentation and exploration in emerging adulthood. In fact, the general idea behind general education courses in university institutions kind of recognizes the importance of exploration, trying out things that you might not have otherwise tried out. So thinking about work life in emerging adulthood, for many emerging adults, a central work-life concern is the manage of schoolwork, which I use interchangeably in this presentation, and partnership. And by partnership, I mean dating or sexual or romantic partnerships. Now, that's not the only work-life concern, certainly. I study other aspects of emerging adults' work-life concerns where they're managing schoolwork with soccer practice, or a sick relative who they're trying to visit while they're trying to complete finals. So it's not the only one, but it's a central one, in particular because the two ends of that binary each represent important developmental tasks in emerging adulthood. In emerging adulthood, we are trying to develop our occupational selves. We're engaging in what's called vocational anticipatory socialization. So internships, extracurricular activities, clubs, in addition to schoolwork, things that we're trying to figure out who we are as a worker in our contemporary society. And we also have the developmental task of forming and trying on our relational selves. By the end of adolescence, most emerging adults have developed the capacity for pair bonds to some extent. We're sort of physiologically, in terms of our body development and hormonally, able to engage in pair bonding, but that's a very different task from what comes next, which is figuring out kind of how to do the integration of self with another in romantic partnership. Because these developmental tasks are taking place, emerging adults are susceptible to what's called work partnership spillover, where strains or stress in one domain, like in a romantic relationship, either create or maybe exacerbate strains in another domain. So if any of you have or know anyone who has experienced having a stressful argument with a romantic partner or an ex or something late into the evening, and you find, gosh, that makes it really hard to focus on your chemistry quiz the next day. That's an example of spillover. So even though we're susceptible to these negative effects, fortunately, efficacy, or the ability to effectively manage work partnership conflict, is associated with greater life satisfaction, decreased relational conflict, as well as work stress, and also improved health among emerging adults. So that's why I study it. Now, my approach, obviously, I mentioned I'm a faculty member of the College of Communication. So work life is achieved or enacted through communication. What I mean by that is that, first of all, we engage in communication like we negotiate time off or we negotiate household chores with our roommates. So that's a form of interpersonal communication. Basically, individuals take up, contest, and sometimes reinscribe work-life boundaries in concert with other social actors. So it could be the examples that I'm talking about, but it also could be sort of engaging with broader systemic or societal level discourses, which is another form of communication, in order to achieve our work-life experience. So the current project that I'm talking about with you today looks at emerging adults' communicative sense-making of their work partnership boundary strategies. So there's been a lot about kind of how emerging adults anticipate their future roles. This project is focused on how emerging adults who are living this work partnership conflict or work partnership dilemmas, how they're making sense of it, how they're talking it through, what sort of societal level discourses they're drawing on to do so. And as I say here, I'm examining this communicative sense-making process through the lens of relational dialectics theory 2.0, which is a theory advanced by a relational communication scholar. I'm not going to get too heavy in theory today, but I will say one of the main tenets of RDT 2.0, as we call it, tenets, is that relational communication is not actually confined to the words spoken or uttered between relational partners at a given moment in time. Rather, any given utterance that partners might speak to each other invokes and makes reference to utterance across a larger utterance chain. We won't get into too much depth with the theory here, but I will say the current focus of this project is paying attention to how what relational partners' speech utterance, what reference those make to a kind of utterance called the distal already spoken. That's a theoretical term to say circulating cultural discourses or ideas of which relational partners are already aware. And in so doing, in speaking and making reference to those discourses, it gives comprehensibility, it gives meaning to their relational level utterances. So the research questions that are guiding this program of research and this project that I'm talking with you specifically about are, first, what discourses, what societal level systems of meaning, which discourses are competing or vying for attention in emerging adults' talk about various work partnership boundaries? And then by extension, how does the competition or the tension among those various discourses make or render specific boundary strategies meaningful? So the method for this study, I want to make a note. I use quantitative, large-scale survey level research a lot in my research. But for studies in which I really want rich description and I really want highlighting the voices of my participants to be paramount, I find qualitative interview methodology to be most advantageous. Now, the goal of a qualitative interview study is still to identify systematic patterns, but the power to identify those patterns in a qualitative study comes not from mathematical power of computing statistics like I would get in a quantitative survey study or the ability to test hypotheses, but instead the power to identify patterns and make claims about human experience is in the rich and granular and nuanced descriptions that the participants offer about their decision making, their experiences, etc. So this was a sample of 28 college enrolled emerging adults who gave generously of their time for some qualitative interviews. So let's talk a little bit about the results, first in terms of segmentation strategies. So if you recall, segmentation strategies are those on the continuum where folks are trying to separate or keep apart aspects of work, in this case, work or schoolwork and partnership. So here's a quote from a participant named Will to get us started. Will says, "When I first arrived at college, it was exciting. I was getting letters from my girlfriend, like tapes on how to survive your freshman year, care packages. So we were both very excited. And like she would always put, P.S. remember us little people are your fans. So it was very supportive and exciting. And we thought at that time, we thought we could make this work. But I think maybe it was around winter quarter. That's when I got more classes and I thought, oh, they're not kidding around, these professors in this new college life. So that's when I started buckling down really. You know, in high school, you study the night before and you're okay. And that's not going to pass here." Will eventually exhibited a segmentation strategy by terminating his romantic relationship with his girlfriend from back home. And that represents one form of segmentation that emerging adults exhibit, which is segmentation by accommodation. So basically, they're accommodating their heavy school or workload by de-escalating or terminating romantic relationships. I do also observe in my data a form of segmentation by containment, where folks are trying to separate work and relational activities to prevent spillover. So if this is the strategy that some participants are exhibiting, what are some of the societal level discourses that are contending in their talk to try to make these strategies meaningful? One of them, which shows up in the title of the presentation, is pragmatism. So discourses of pragmatism render actions intelligible according to their efficiency and logic, typically privileging rational, efficient, and deliberate course of action. Discourses of pragmatism are also understood in tension with discourses of risk, which frame various action in terms of the threat of loss. So here's an example specifically of how we can see pragmatism making that segmentation strategy meaningful. This is a participant named Zaylin. She says, "I think this is the most important time for me to be focused on the right things." She's talking about college. "I've seen instances where people are focused on the wrong things and where that gets them. I just feel like relationships are something that can come later on in life. Opportunities for like a career, they don't always come around. And I just feel like there are people who maybe will focus their time on relationships and go back to school later on. but I don't think the same opportunities are there for them. And I think people recognize that. So you can hear, even though Zaylin has hesitance in those vocal fillers, which are important to her ongoing sense-making system or process, she exemplifies how pragmatism in talk about work partnership segmentation voiced school or work as the unquestionably more important activity. So this is an investment, and against the backdrop of what really matters, which is school and work, relationships tend to be voiced as a somewhat risky proposition. So there we hear that idea of risk coming in. They threaten someone's ability to complete or excel in schoolwork by consuming your time or creating distractions. And so this framing constructs a segmentation strategy as pragmatic, as one that minimizes risk, importantly, by completing life's tasks in some kind of optimal order. However, we know from relational dialectics theory that sometimes a discourse, even one that gives incredible power to a form of action, may exhibit a disjuncture or a rupture. This is kind of a fragmenting in itself, where it might recommend seemingly contradictory actions. And so in these data, I saw a disjuncture as pragmatism, which mostly was invoked or voiced to legitimize a segmentation strategy, was also invoked to argue against separating work and partnership because of various risks. So here's an example of how that shows up in participants' language. Elma says, well, my parents kind of want me to be done with school and then date someone. But then I feel like that's a very stressful period in adulting in general, because that's when you're trying to find a job and trying to figure out where you want to go in life. So it's like, if I'm graduating, I'll be 22, 23 already. And then it's just the pressure of, oh my God, I'm going to be alone forever type of thing. It's like, what are the chances I'm going to find someone that I would want to spend, the rest of my life with? So what Elma is talking about here is this risk in segmenting work and partnership during emerging adulthood of really running out of time to find a partner. And so we can see how she invokes her parents' pragmatism, saying, hey, get done with school and then date someone. But she's saying, gosh, there's risk associated with that too. And so it kind of puts a crack in the meaning system, or delegitimizes or challenges her parents' claim that segmentation is really, in fact, the most pragmatic boundary system. Next, I want to talk about how emerging adults voiced work and partnership segmentation as a temporary strategy that's temporarily useful or necessary, but has an eventual endpoint. This is Alma saying, I feel like she's talking about her and her partner considering segmenting work and partnership by allowing themselves to go long distance after graduation so that they can each work in different cities. She says, I feel like, yeah, because you can't be long distance forever, but I think it's still good for us too. If it's a really good opportunity to go and take it, even if it's for like a couple of years or so, just to kind of develop ourselves and learn within our field and stuff, just to kind of build up our resume and stuff. And then that will make it easier if one of us is trying to get a job. If I'm trying to get a job wherever he's working, or around wherever he is working, or vice versa. Now, in Elma's case, she's not wrong. She's identifying how she and her partner potentially living in separate cities so that they can invest in what's called human capital can increase their earning potential and their ability to compete for jobs in a location where they could both work. This is a very logical turn of phrase, thinking about how in our country we rely increasingly on dual earners within a couple to make ends meet. And so in some sense, it's very wise to think of the short-term segmentation as having this payoff that eventually benefits their ability to be together in the long run. But unfortunately, the short-term nature of these expectations may go unmet. We find in research that demands on workers' time tend not to abate mid-career, and tensions among sort of your own career as well as your desire for a relationship also continue to characterize the management of adult relationships. And so even though emerging adults may sort of cast this as a temporary strategy that pays off and that it benefits the relationship in the long run, there is a minor risk, or a substantial risk, that those expectations of things kind of the pressure relieving may go unmet. So let's pivot now to talking about how emerging adults consider ways that they could integrate their work and partnership during emerging adulthood. So there were a couple of ways that I observed intentional intermingling of work and partnership, or at least talk about it. So they talked about it in terms of their current work and partnership, as well as contemplating relocating together, co-relocation after graduation. So here we see passion come in, and you may be disappointed to learn that passion in this instance is not actually talking about their romantic or partners or sexual partners. For the emerging adults that I interviewed, they talked about passion in terms of work. Emerging adults are suspicious of work partnership strategies such as co-relocation because of a fear that they'll constrain the pursuit of passion in paid work. And in particular, they're worried about constraining their partner's passion or ability to pursue passion in paid work. Here's a participant named Tara. Tara is talking about a reluctance to form a committed relationship with her partner because she thinks it might impede his work progress. She says, Joel does love me a lot, and I think like he does a lot for me. He's the one who gives me my injections or shots every day, and I feel that makes our relationship very different and stronger. So I feel like he would follow me if it got to that point, but I just feel like for myself, I wouldn't let that happen if it was like destructive to our relationship. Like, you don't want to have to say like, I ripped you away from your passion. So Tara describes a relationship that's characterized by strength and dedication, as evidenced by Joel's caretaking. He helps her manage a chronic illness. But she ultimately rejects the possibility that Joel might relocate with her as untenable. She doesn't want him to forego his individual passion because of a felt responsibility to take care of Tara. And she discursively, meaning communicatively, links that hypothetical action, his following her or trailing her, so to speak, with the potential destruction of the relationship. Now, in one sense, this is a very generous sentiment. Writers, artists, philosophers, relational scientists like myself have documented over centuries the ways that people consider sacrifice for each other for the sake of the relationship. And so the data that I'm getting here are interesting in that regard, but they're also notable because they're voicing a particular kind of work as worthy of sacrificing the relationship. So these data reflect what scholars refer to as an understanding of self-actualization through occupation. Now, you may have heard people say things like, do what you love. I think Steve Jobs is among those who famously said that. The implication being that if you find work that you're passionate about or work that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. You might have heard that adage. But there's a catch in constructing work as holding up this, passionate ideal, this ideal that work needs to be intrinsically rewarded and suited to our individual interests. One of them is the potential erasure of other meanings of work. There are lots of ways that we get meaning from our work. Some of it is passion, but sometimes people work for material need. And we want to take care that we don't make passion the dominant meaning of work, such that we erase the material reality of others. There's another drawback of discursively constructing work as based in passion, and that's vulnerability to exploitation. So one of my colleagues in New Zealand, her name is Kathleen Kuhn, she writes about hope labor, which is a kind of labor that people undertake typically for free or very low wages in competitive industries. So you could picture like your typical rising wannabe Instagram influencer, where they're creating tons of content, often for free or for low wages or just in exchange for product, hoping that they'll get an attractive following and enough of a following that they can get a foothold in the industry. And it sometimes work out, but sometimes it doesn't work out. And so there's the vulnerability to exploitation if we hold up passion as the most important kind of work. And as we've seen here, individuals are sometimes even willing to discard their close relationships because they wouldn't want to threaten their own or their partner's access to work that gives them intrinsic rewards or about which they feel passionate. So where do we go from here? We've identified how emerging adults think in terms of pragmatism and segmenting work and partnership. And they recognize that hopefully that will be a short-term strategy with a payoff that will eventually benefit the relationship in the long run because you've developed as individuals and you can come together and be happy. We've also seen how in their talk about work partnership boundary strategies, they're really elevating passion and passionate work and the notion of do what you love as an ideal. So where do we go from here? As scholars, we're never satisfied with just one bit of data. Where are we progressing? So by way of concluding, I want to highlight that a minority of participants, but a significant minority, described ways that work and partnership enhanced each other. Whether it was from having a partner who expanded their horizons, which is a known benefit of having relationships in general in emerging adulthood, or having a partner who could provide social support during stress, as a participant named Mark expressed here. Mark said, if you have the right relationship, notice that's bolded, the advantages are unlimited. You have someone who, when you're stressed with finals, they're like, hey, you know what? I understand you have a lot of work, but let's take 5 minutes and just get some coffee and relax. Someone that you can really, I guess, take your mind off the harder things is definitely one of the biggest advantages. So emerging adults talk framed romantic relationships as sometimes benefiting the individual through bolstering and expanding their ability to perform as students or workers. However, Mark's language exemplifies an important caveat that textured this way of thinking about romantic relationships as enhancing work. Specifically, finding the right person or right relationship. So when participants talked about partner support or encouragement, or even having distraction, like Mark references, they talked about that having the potential to enhance their performance and growth as workers, but they're kind of relying on this discourse of romanticism or the idea that the right partner is a magic bullet. And this is not the first time we've seen this association that like work and partnership can work, but it has to be the right person. Sheryl Sandberg, who is kind of the number 2 in charge at Facebook, famously said about 10 years ago now, the most important career choice you'll make is who you marry. Now, Sandberg writes and speaks a lot to women in business, so sometimes her language is a little bit gendered in that way, but it's been echoed elsewhere in academic and popular research. We really have begun to get an understanding that finding a partner who wants to pursue things on the same values and the same timeline and structure as you, and who views you as an equal is essential to success in work. It's not just recently that we've identified that. That's been the case over the centuries. But we know still surprisingly little about how emerging adults engage that process. And in particular, as a relational communication scholar, what are the relational communication processes that are really at work as they make that choice? And so that's where my research is going next. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that obviously those processes are gendered, but they're also raced and classed. Even this whole idea of do what you love and find your passions has an elitist tone to it and may not represent the interests or the experiences of those, for instance, in the working class. So that's what I'm undertaking next. And I greatly appreciate your thinking about these ideas with me. I'm looking forward to our continued discussion this week. If you have questions for me at any point or just want to reach out, or you're coming to Chicago or considering advanced study or the science of relationships, I've posted my email here. Otherwise, I just want to emphasize just how proud I am to get to be with you all this week, and just truly honored. And your education is just going to be wonderfully transformative. And so I'm so grateful and privileged to get to talk with you.